Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper, beginning with a news item on page number 1 of the Delhi edition of The Hindu relevant for your GS paper 2. Ministers flouting norms, says the Election Commission of India. But to understand this newspaper article, we need to understand what is Model Code of Conduct. So let's understand this Model Code of Conduct in great detail. We'll talk about the evolution of Model Code of Conduct, the provisions of Model Code of Conduct, whether it is effective in Indian elections or not, and what is the role of Election Commission of India to enforce this Model Code of Conduct. When the first general election was to be held in 1951, the then Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru made a request to his ministers that please separate your government work from the election work. That means if you want to campaign in your constituency, don't use the government resources, don't use the government machinery for your campaigning. Because what is the objective? The objective is to provide a level playing field for everybody. And in absence of a level playing field, we can't possibly hold free and fair elections in this country. Because let's understand, the government has machinery on its side. The vehicles, the money, the resources, the manpower. If any government wants to misuse these resources, then the opposition stands no chance to win these elections. So the idea of free and fair elections will take a hit, and we cannot provide level playing field for all the contestants in these elections. Some ministers accepted this request, some did not. But then let's enter into 1960. In 1960, the Kerala state administration came up with a rule. All political parties came together and they decided that we have to ensure level playing field in the elections. And they agreed on two principles. Number one, the government should not misuse the state machinery for campaigning. And number two, bribe should not be given to lure the voters. Election Commission of India got the hint of this, and Election Commission of India wondered, why can't we replicate the same model throughout the country? Because this model looks very good. If all political parties are coming together voluntarily and they want to enforce these rules to enable a level playing field in the Indian elections, this is the model that we should replicate throughout the country. That in 1962, Election Commission of India, what it did, it circulated a document. It circulated a document to all the states for the implementation with the consent of these political parties, a model code of conduct which Election Commission termed as a minimum code of conduct. Prior to 1967 general elections, initiatives were taken by chief ministers in Kerala, in West Bengal and Tamil Nadu. All the political parties in these three states, they came together to ensure that we should follow a minimum code of conduct. That means if a political party is organizing a rally at a particular location, we should not threaten the participants of that political rally. We should not trespass into that rally. We should allow every single political party to advocate its policies, its ideologies, so that these political parties through their campaigning can lure the voters to vote for their respective political parties. This is something that we should ensure. Uniquely, Tamil Nadu had a standing committee of 7 members. These members were drawn from different political parties, and these 7 members had one task at hand, that you have to ensure that this minimum code of conduct is adhered to. You have to ensure that no political party violates this minimum code of conduct. Based on this experience, the Election Commission of India prepared a document in the interests of free and fair election. And this document was titled An Appeal to Political Parties for Observance of a Minimum Code of Conduct During the Election Propaganda. And it is this code that came to be known as the Model Code of Conduct. But later on, 1979, this Model Code of Conduct was implemented. But Election Commission revised this Model Code of Conduct in 1991, amplified this Model Code of Conduct in 1991 under the leadership of a legendary Chief Election Commissioner named T.N. Session. And T.N. Session gave us the Model Code of Conduct in its present form. That means this Model Code of Conduct has evolved thanks to the credit of the political parties. This Model Code of Conduct is a voluntary document wherein political parties volunteer to adhere to this Model Code of Conduct. We need to understand that this Model Code of Conduct is a voluntary document to which all the political parties have adhered to. All the political parties have pledged that we will adhere to this Model Code of Conduct. This Model Code of Conduct is not mentioned in the Constitution. This Model Code of Conduct is not mentioned in any law passed by the Parliament. That means this Model Code of Conduct is a voluntary document of all the political parties, and all the political parties have pledged that we will adhere to this document. But now let's look at what are the provisions of this Model Code of Conduct. I will give you some broad provisions because there are a whole lot of provisions, but I'll give you very broad provisions of this Model Code of Conduct so that you have an idea what this Model Code of Conduct is all about. Number one, no party or candidate shall participate in any activity if this activity creates differences based on caste, religion, or language. Number two, you criticize but don't get personal. That means if you have to criticize the BJP, criticize BJP on the promises that they made. Criticize the Congress party on its ideology, on the policies, or on the work that Congress party has done from 2004 to 2014. But don't get personal. Don't make personal remarks against the Prime Minister or the leader of the opposition or any other political candidate. Third, no appeal for votes in the name of caste or communal feelings. But this Model Code of Conduct has particularly very stringent provisions for the government of the day. What the government cannot do? Number one, the ministers shall not combine their government work, shall not combine their official visit with campaigns or with their election campaigns, and the ministers should not use the official machinery or the official personnel for their campaigns. That is one restriction on the government. Second, no new policies can be announced by the government when Model Code of Conduct is in place. When Model Code of Conduct enters into place, as soon as the dates are announced by the Election Commission of India, Model Code of Conduct comes into play. And this Model Code of Conduct stays till the declaration of results. That means this Model Code of Conduct, which is a voluntary document of these political parties, it enters into force as soon as the election dates are announced by the Election Commission of India, and it remains in force till the time of the declaration of results. And during this time, no new policies can be announced by the government of India. Why? Let's say, for example, the government, when Model Code of Conduct is in place, just before the actual voting, the government announces a policy that the retirement age of government employees is raised from 58 to 60, or from 60 to 65, or from 65 to 70. Then in all likelihood, it is similar to providing bribes to the voters that you vote for us. And since only government of the day can announce such a policy, we are violating level playing field. That means the opposition will stand no chance to win these elections. That is why when Model Code of Conduct comes into play, no new policies can be announced by the government. Number three, the government has a lot of money at its disposal. What if the government uses this public money and will issue advertisements in various newspapers and on television screens that you should vote for my political party? That means the government has the potential to misuse this public money, issue advertisements at the cost of the state exchequer, and ask people to vote for their political parties. That is something that a government cannot do. That means issue of advertisements at the cost of public exchequer is banned by this Model Code of Conduct. Fourth very important point, don't make payments out of the discretionary funds from the time Model Code of Conduct comes into place. This discretionary fund is available with the Finance Ministry. Let us look at it this way. If I have to ask people in my constituency to vote for me, I would either pay them cash or give them liquor. But the government has a different advantage. What if in a particular state the government is on a slippery wicket? The government may not be in a position, or the political party which forms the government is not in a position to win largest number of seats. What the government can do, it can make payments from this discretionary fund and specially target that particular state, and ultimately it will tend amount to bribing the voters. This is something which is prohibited by Model Code of Conduct. That means no payments can be made from discretionary funds from the time Model Code of Conduct comes into place. But if there is a necessity for that, you have to seek the permission of Election Commission of India. And unless and until permission is granted by Election Commission of India, you cannot make payments from the discretionary fund. That is what this newspaper article is all about. This newspaper article says that all the government machinery should adhere to the norms which are prescribed by the Election Commission of India if payments from the discretionary funds are to be released when Model Code of Conduct comes into play. But is this Model Code of Conduct working on the ground? Is Model Code of Conduct effective when it comes to Indian elections? Yes, as well as no. Former Chief Election Commissioner N. Gopalaswamy, he writes that I was in Myanmar to oversee the elections in Myanmar. And just before the elections, officers of the army were promoted at the time of the elections. This is something that we can't see in Indian elections. Similarly, he writes that in Sri Lanka, army was actively campaigning for one political party. This is something that cannot happen in India. Some people say that it is not Model Code of Conduct, but it is Moral Code of Conduct. What is this Moral Code of Conduct? If a candidate A violates the provisions of this Model Code of Conduct, Election Commission of India issues a notice to this candidate. And the success of this Model Code of Conduct can be ascertained from the fact that as soon as this candidate receives this notice, immediately he replies back to this notice by the Election Commission of India. How? Let's look at some of the examples. BJP President Amit Shah, he made some remarks while campaigning in Lok Sabha elections in 2014. He was in Muzaffarnagar and he talked about badla or revenge for Muzaffarnagar riots. Election Commission of India sent notice to Amit Shah. Amit Shah immediately replied back to this notice, apologized, and ultimately he was allowed to campaign in Uttar Pradesh. Similar notice was issued to Azam Khan, but he did not apologize and Azam Khan was banned from campaigning in Uttar Pradesh. That means the Model Code of Conduct is in effect a moral code of conduct. That means although there is no law which gives backing to this Model Code of Conduct, but this Model Code of Conduct is working effectively because Election Commission of India is impartially implementing the provisions of this Model Code of Conduct. Let me give you one humorous example. There was a chief minister from a northern state. Election dates were announced. That means Model Code of Conduct was in force. And during Model Code of Conduct, ministers cannot combine their official visits with the election visits. So what the chief minister did, he flew in the government helicopter, went to Nirvachan Sadhan, the election commission headquarters in New Delhi, and asked the election commission to please revise the election dates. Election Commission of India said, we will look into this, but first, since you have combined the election work with your official work, that means you have flown in a government helicopter, please make the payment for this government helicopter ride first, then we will have a look at your suggestion. It is through this impartial application and implementation of Model Code of Conduct that Election Commission of India has won praises throughout the world. But sometimes Election Commission of India, while implementing Model Code of Conduct, is sometimes acting in a childish manner. Let's say, for example, when Uttar Pradesh elections were to be conducted, the Election Commission of India ordered the then BSP government headed by Mayawati that in Lucknow you have constructed these parks wherein elephant statues have been constructed. Since elephant is the symbol of BSP, And if these elephant statues are visible everywhere, then we cannot provide level playing field to all the political parties. So what you have to do, you have to drape these elephant statues. Many people remarked that these draped or cloth elephant statues gave more visibility to Bahujan Samajwadi Party than the naked elephant statues could have provided it. Similarly, BJP government in Madhya Pradesh, they distributed textbooks to the school children, and on the front page of these textbooks, lotus symbol was published. And since lotus is the election symbol of the BJP, the election commission ordered that till the time the results are declared, stop the distribution of these textbooks. Similarly, for example, Model Code of Conduct prohibits that you should not make personal remarks against your political opponents. You can attack each other's ideology, policies and programs, but don't get personal. When 2014 election campaigning was going on, someone called somebody Pappu, and someone else retorted back and said Fiku. Election Commission of India entered into the picture and said, don't use these words. What do you think? Should such words be used while campaigning in Indian election? Some people say no, we can't use these words because we are demeaning our political opponents by these words. Others said we should allow this. Why? What is the purpose of election? The purpose of election is not just that you have to choose your representatives for the next 5 years. The purpose of election is also to impart political knowledge. When political candidates are campaigning in these elections, they educate the people about the rights that people have, about the duties that people have, about the laws that have been passed by the parliament for the welfare of the people, about the policies of the government of India, about the failure of these policies or the success of these policies. All these things are integral part of our election campaigning. That means one of the most important purpose of the Indian election is also to impart political knowledge to the people of this country. And to impart political knowledge to the people of this country, we need to have people coming in large numbers in the form of crowds and attending these public meetings. If we are subtracting humor from these election campaign meetings, then very less number of people will attend these election rallies, and this goal of imparting political knowledge to the people of this country will be defeated. So many people are saying that we should not sanitize the election speeches. Some political leaders will have the gift of humor, will have the gift of peppering their speeches with humor, and that will draw crowds into their election meetings and political knowledge will be imparted to them. That is why N. Gopalaswamy says that while Election Commission of India is implementing Model Code of Conduct, it should follow a policy that it should be as hard as steel and as soft as a petal. That is what in Sanskrit we call this Vajradapi Katorani Mruduni Kusumadapi, as hard as steel and as soft as a petal. But many people are saying that if this Model Code of Conduct does not have a legal status, there is no law backing this Model Code of Conduct, what if political parties violate this Model Code of Conduct? Will any action be taken against them? We need to understand that there are two sets of provisions in Model Code of Conduct. For example, there is a set of provisions in Model Code of Conduct, and if you violate them, you can be booked but under different laws. For example, Model Code of Conduct says you should not bribe voters. Bribery is already a punishable offense under Indian Penal Code. Model Code of Conduct says that you should not trespass into the rallies of your political opponents. You should allow all these political parties to freely campaign for their representatives, for their candidates. If any political party violates this, they can be booked for trespass, and trespass is a crime after all. Similarly, Model Code of Conduct says you should not ask for votes in the name of religion, caste, language. It is already an offense under Representation of the People's Act 1951. But there are other provisions that do not have legal backing. For example, what if the government announces a policy when Model Code of Conduct comes into play? In that case, this Model Code of Conduct turns into Moral Code of Conduct. How? Former Chief Election Commissioner S.Y. Qureshi writes in his book that there was a time when law minister of this country, he announced a policy despite the fact that model code of conduct came into play. Election Commission issued notice to this law minister. He still went ahead and announced this policy. But then what President of India did? President censured that law minister. And when the election time came, this law minister lost his election. That means people do not take lightly when somebody violates this model code of conduct. And people punish those individuals, those political party leaders who violate this model code of conduct. They punish them by not voting in their favor in these elections. That is why there are other provisions that may not have legal backing, but they have moral backing. There was a time when Election Commission of India was asking the central government, please provide us legal status. But from 2012 onwards, Election Commission of India has said that we don't need legal status at all. Because if legal status is given to this model code of conduct, then the implementation of this model code of conduct will shift from Election Commission of India to the Supreme Court. Because then the judiciary will come into play whenever violations of this model code of conduct will come into play. And we know judiciary is a slow poison in this country. It will take judiciary years or even decades to decide whether model code of conduct was violated or not. Because Election Commission can instantly give justice whenever some political party leaders violate model code of conduct. And they even have a power to de-recognize that political party. They even have a power to disqualify that member from contesting these elections. And if this model code of conduct is given a legal status, then these decisions cannot be taken by Election Commission, instead can be taken by the judiciary. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at another news on page number 6, relevant for your GS paper 2. Mere sloganeering cannot invite sedition. And sedition is something that we have discussed in detail in our January 15, the Hindu newspaper analysis. So if you have not watched that newspaper analysis, please go through that. I'm just mentioning it here because this newspaper article is important. Someone would have assumed that this newspaper article is not important, but it is important, and we have discussed this in detail in our January 15 newspaper analysis. Let's look at another issue on page number 9, relevant for your general awareness. The cattle and livestock, they are a significant source of methane. And methane is a greenhouse gas, and this methane is a significant contributor to global warming. And this is something that we knew. But what we didn't know is that cow urine may also be adding to global warming. How do we know about this? A study has been published in scientific reports. This study says that the cow urine or the cattle urine is a source of nitrous oxide emissions. And as a gas, this is 300 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Let's look at another issue on page number 13. The Russian envoy to India says that S-400 deal is a proof of India-Russia ties. And what this S-400 defense system is all about, we have discussed this in detail in our October 4, 2018 newspaper analysis. So if you do not know what this S-400 deal is all about, please go through the first thing that we have discussed in our October 4 newspaper analysis. Let's look at another issue on page number 14, relevant for your prelims as well as geography aspect of your GS paper 1. Arctic chill sweeps over US Midwest. The temperatures in many states in United States are forecast to be the coldest in a generation. In fact, Chicago, which is America's third largest city, it is expected to be colder than some parts of Antarctica. What sort of a prelims based question can be asked from this newspaper article? Let's have a look. Consider the following statements about polar vortex, which is causing this Arctic chill. These are the areas of high pressure surrounding the Earth's pole. Wrong. The air here flows in counterclockwise direction, which keeps the air colder near the poles. This is correct. So which of the above statements are correct? B only. What is the explanation? The polar vortex is an area of low pressure, an extremely cold air that swirls over the Arctic. Now what happens if there are disturbances in the jet stream? If there is an intrusion of warmer air, it can disturb this polar vortex, and this polar vortex can send the Arctic air south into the middle latitudes. And this is causing Arctic chill in some of the states in Northern America or in United States of America. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let us look at some of the editorials and columns in today's newspaper, beginning with Stormy Weather Awaits India in 2019, written by M.K. Narayan, the former National Security Advisor as well as the Governor of West Bengal. If you read this article, you may either call the writer a pessimist or someone who is trying to show the Indian state its mirror. The writer is talking about events of 2018 and what the future will look like for the Indian state in 2019. And according to the writer, 2019 is going to be gloomy or stormy. Let's look at this article in slight detail, and we shall divide this article into three categories. The domestic concerns raised by the writer, the international concerns or external concerns raised by the writer, and concerns surrounding the economy. Let's first look at the domestic concerns. The writer says, number one, internal security was slightly better in 2018. How? Fewer attacks on Indian soil sponsored and fueled by Pakistan. But left-wing extremism, the Maoist attacks, the Naxal attacks, they went up a bit. Although this left-wing extremism, this movement is now confined within the core areas of Chhattisgarh, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Odisha and Jharkhand. This is the story of India's internal security right now in terms of left-wing extremism. Because these Maoists, they want to overthrow the central government. They want to overthrow the state, and they call for a people's rule in this country. But the most challenging internal security problem will be in Kashmir and Northeast, according to the writer. Why in Kashmir? In 2016, a militant commander, Burhan Wani, was killed by the security forces. Kashmir was in flames and more than 100 people were killed by the security forces. And even today, the security situation is worsening day by day. Educated youth are entering into the terrorist circles. Professors of universities, PhD holders, scholars, engineers, they are joining the ranks of the militant organizations. And this, M.K. Narayanan says, is very, very gloomy for the Indian state. In fact, the security situation is such that there was a vacancy in Anantnag Lok Sabha seat, and the election to Anantnag Lok Sabha parliamentary constituency was not even conducted. An election to Srinagar Lok Sabha constituency was conducted. It recorded 7% voting, which is unprecedented in the history of elections in Jammu and Kashmir. And when a repoll was done, the voting percentage was only 2%. Now the government has also fallen. The BJP-PDP government collapsed, and now there is president's rule in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So the biggest problem or internal security problem in India, according to the writer, is in Kashmir and the other in Northeast. And this is particularly to do with the Citizenship Amendment Bill, which is right now pending in the Parliament. According to the Citizenship Amendment Bill, illegal immigrants who are non-Muslims, and if they come from Afghanistan, Pakistan or Bangladesh, because they are fleeing religious persecution in these three countries, if they enter into India before 2014, December 2014, they will be provided Indian citizenship. People in the Northeast allege that the citizenship bill has the potential to alter the demography of Northeast, has the potential to change the demography in such a manner that the ethnic groups or the tribal groups in Northeast will be reduced to a minority. That is why Northeast people or the political groups in Northeast, they are up in arms against the central government regarding the Citizenship Amendment Bill. So the two bigger problems that we are facing right now on the internal security front are in Kashmir and in Northeast. There are two more issues on internal security front according to the writer. One is the farmers' distress, farmers committing suicide, farmers asking for loan waivers, farmers asking for hike in MSP prices. And second, the Dalit unrest. The writer says that both these can ignite fire, especially in an election year. But now let's look at the external situation. According to the writer, we may be entering into an era of Cold War II. There was a period of Cold War after the Second World War. This Cold War was between United States and the USSR, and it ended when USSR got dismembered in 1991. But now the writer says that this time we may be entering into Cold War II, but this time it may not just be between United States and Russia. It may also be between United States and China. All the things that have been mentioned in this article we have covered in detail in our previous lectures. For example, Maldives elections, Brexit, trade war between US and China, China-Pakistan economic corridor. So we won't elaborate on these issues as it would then take quite a few hours to discuss. But please search these issues on our YouTube channel and you will find detailed analysis on these issues. For example, Maldives election, we have covered in detail in our September 24 newspaper analysis. Brexit is something that we have covered in detail. My colleague has covered in our 17th Jan 2019 newspaper analysis. But let's first look at some of the good things that the writer says happened to India in 2018 on this external front. Number one, Maldives. The president of Maldives, the then president of Maldives, Abdullah Yameen, was very close to China. Many people argued that he was anti-India. But then he was defeated in the elections and Mohammad Ibrahim Saleh became the head of the government in Maldives. And Mr. Saleh has agreed to strengthen the relationship between India and Maldives. Second, the win of Sheikh Hasina in the Bangladeshi election and became the Prime Minister for a third successive term. And Sheikh Hasina is also considered to be a friend of India. This is a positive development that happened to India in 2018 on the diplomacy front. But why 2019 will be gloomy for India according to the writer? Following other reasons. Number one, China. China is making heavy investments in Myanmar, in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan, and may also get countries such as Nepal and Bangladesh on its side. And all China has to do, provide military and economic aid to Nepal and Bangladesh, and both these countries can take the side of the China. The result, India will be isolated in its neighborhood. Second problem is Japan and Russia. Traditionally, both these countries have been very close to India, but the writer says that the ties might reset in 2019. Japan and Russia, they are both becoming closer and closer to China. So despite the fact that India-Japan relationship has been good in the past, Prime Minister Modi and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, they share good personal equation with each other, but the writer says that China's entry into the picture can change this. And despite signing deals such as S-400 defense system by India with Russia, the entry of China, according to the writer, is surely gonna change this system. And then there is a third element, economy. This article says that it is speculated that US is moving into a period of slower growth. And this period of slower growth may continue for a fairly long time. Second, Chinese economy is also showing signs of slowing down. Third, the trade war between United States and China, where United States was imposing tariffs on Chinese goods, China retaliated by imposing tariffs on the US goods. Fourth, Brexit. The writer says that all these will surely impact India. India won't be insulated from these developments. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. There is another beautiful article written by Pooja Mehra, The Case for a Minimum Basic Income. But trust me, if you watch my lecture on universal basic income, that is there on our YouTube channel. You don't need to read anything regarding universal basic income at all. So please watch that lecture if you haven't. You will get all the details related to universal basic income. Now let's look at some of the prelims based questions, beginning with the Beveridge curve shows the relationship between unemployment rate and the job vacancy rate. There is a huge controversy going on right now on the unemployment data that is to be released. That is why this question. Map-based question, because South African president was on a visit to India recently. South Africa has a coastline on both the South Atlantic Ocean in the west and Indian Ocean in the east. Correct. Mafadi is the highest mountain in South Africa. Correct. Both these statements are correct. Previous year's prelims based question, the terms WannaCry, Petya, Eternal Blue, sometimes mentioned in the news recently, are related to cyber attacks. Now let's look at a mains based question. Answer should be in less than 250 words, and it's about Model Code of Conduct. Comment on the efficiency of Model Code of Conduct in ensuring free and fair elections in India. That is it from our newspaper analysis today. Thank you for being with us. Have a great day.